law that's saying that opening someone else's post is illegal. It's criminal. They
Really?
trust the post office.
Wow.
So to send it by email, it's not secure, even with PGP. But to send it clear text, black on paper, in an envelope via the post, it's super secure.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Wow.
It's amazing here. They're in some point they're super advanced, in other point they're like in the 70s.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's when I arrived to Germany, I had to write a letter after I don't know 10 years that I didn't have they didn't send any letter in Israel. I didn't know how to put the stamp on the envelope. It's amazing. Yeah.
I had the same experience here.
My generation used to collect stamps.
Collect stamp. Yeah.
I still collect stamps and coins.
You do?
Yeah.
Really? Wow. Okay.
I have
Wow.
a very, very nice collection of coins from 168 countries,
Yeah.
and also from stamps. I have, I think, 13 or 14 books
Wow. No way.
with a lot of rare stamps.
Wow. That's interesting.
You're oldie.
I'm not that old, dude. I'm 37.
No, oldie, not old.
All right, guys. Let's continue to domain 5. Domain 5. The way we look at domain 5 is basically access control. If you look at the CISSP as a whole, you can probably find domain 5 related to almost any question in the CISSP. Yes, the base is domain 1, risk management and all, but this one is really the base of security controls. The way people or subjects access objects, and the way this connection is being done, and the way this connection can be secured by us. So when we look at the overall domain, we can find many variables here of how to secure that connectivity between the subject and the object. And that one includes 2 chapters, 13 and 14. And hopefully we'll be able to cover them both in the next hour. If not, then we'll save some for tomorrow. So let's start with the CIA triad, and we previously saw this one and fully understood this one, as well as the next one. But let's recap on that one. So the objects are passive, the subjects are active. The connection between them needs to maintain the CINA security. So confidentiality, we don't want to disclose objects to unauthorized subjects. Integrity, we only want subjects that are authorized to change the objects or modify the objects. And then availability, we want the objects available when the subjects ask for them or needs them. And for that, we connect the IAAA module for identification. And the identification, the downside of identification, which also makes it less interesting for us in terms of security or organizational security, is the fact that anyone can claim any identification. And that's why we don't have that much trust in that layer. Identification can be claimed by anyone. The only part that we can start working on is the authentication. We can challenge that identification. And there are many ways to do authentication and authorization and auditing, and we will see that shortly. The next one is authorization. We want to limit, once the identity was authenticated and they enter the organization, we now want to limit their access to anything that they can do in our organization. So we're basically telling them, you are authorized within my organization, but these are the areas that we are allowed to touch, and these are the areas you're not allowed to touch, based on the job that they are there to do, or the part they are there to do as part of the organization. And last, to create this accountability, we want to make sure that they actually do what we intend them to do. So we keep logs and we audit their actions. And the bottom line of all this IAAA model together is the accountability of that subject, and we can say, you did what you did because I allowed you to actually do that within my organization, and this is how I know that you actually did what you did. So when we look at controls, when we look at techniques in order for us to achieve all this, we can look at techniques in the AAA module. So the identification can be addressed in identity protection, okay, on that side. So educate your users to protect their identity online. Less information on Facebook and social media and such, but as they enter the organization, as they come in and knock on the door, we now can operate with technologies. Excuse me. And some technologies will do the centralized AAA. They will do the centralized authentication, authorization, and auditing for that matter. And to use them, we need to use technology that will fit the business needs and the business capability to implement secure controls. So for that one, if we want to do centralized authentication, centralized server or centralized technology for authentication, authorization, we can use the Radius server. Radius can provide the AAA service, but it uses UDP, which makes it less secure, and that one will encrypt the password only. If you want to move upscale, if you want to move to a much smarter technology, however very expensive, very costly, we will use TACACS and TACACS Plus, which uses TCP and encrypts the entire session of that AAA. For cell phones or mobile networks, we will use Diameter, which looks and acts pretty much the same as Radius, but for mobile networks or mobile IP systems with smartphones. Excuse me. The mechanisms are the same. The mechanisms that we've seen so far for subjects and objects are the same. And we want to maintain those principles, those main two principles, as need to know and list privileges, but also separation of duties and other mechanisms, just to make sure that the method that we connected to the subject and the object are based on something that we can actually audit and excuse me, and make sure that the subject is where we want them to be and not anywhere else. The accountability helps us again, say, okay, this subject actually did this, and I know about the story. This is the story of what that subject actually did on my network. Types of access controls can be one of three, and I know this is a repetition from something that we did yesterday, just to enhance it from a different angle again, and we will talk about technologies pretty soon. It can be preventive, detective, or corrective, so we can prevent subjects from accessing certain objects. Oh, yes, the mail got there. All right, thank you.
The mail arrived, sorry, yeah.
All right, thank you, Shaham. So we can prevent users from or subjects from accessing certain objects, and once they do access objects, we can detect those anomalies and then act on them and correct and isolate the activity and maybe even block that user or put it on quarantine until we figure out what happened there. Some of other access controls, technical access control, can also be deterrent access control. We can pop up a banner at the entry as the user logs in. We can say everything is now recorded. And we can say whatever you do here is recorded and transmitted to our security team. And if you mess up this, guys, not good for you. We can do recovery of access control. We can have the users restore their passwords, automatically. We can have directive controls. We can have policies for passwords, policies for access control, and we can have compensated controls on access control. So if we cannot operate on that connection between subject and object, maybe we can make the objects more accessible via other systems and other techniques. For these categories, we also have the control categories that we've already seen, and that's why I'm being quick about this, because this is covered in previous slides as well, but it's important to repeat this now as we make the connection, the technical connection between subjects and objects. So again, here we can have administrative / management or managerial controls, and also technical / logical. Okay, questions can be on both, and then physical controls. And the combination of all will create that subcategories of controls that we can have as we look at access controls, but as we look at any other controls. The threat modeling that we, yes, Shachar?
I will stop you. I like to have the examples here for for the access control types. If you can, I don't know, just give examples.
Sure.
Because eventually in the test, what they do is they give you an example, a concrete scenario or an access control, and then they ask you which type of access control is that. So
right.
If you can, I don't know, just give us some examples. This would be very helpful, at least for me.
Sure. So let's look at the main three: preventive, detective, and corrective access control. Let's say I'm trying to log into my bank account on the bank's website. Okay, so if I put in another identity that is not mine, let's say my identity is A1235. Okay. And I simply take the 5 and make it into 6. A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Now, the website cannot control the identity that I claim, but it can authenticate. So let's say that there is an identity that is called A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. The way the website or the bank prevents me from authenticating is by adding that password. Okay, as I enter the password, even if it's the correct password, now a text message with the one-time code is being sent to the registered telephone number. Right? This is a method of prevention. So I prevent you from authenticating. And let's say that you got the telephone number updated right before you hacked that account, and you got the text message. Okay, so this one now passed the preventive controls, and now we entered the bank's website. Okay, now we're inside. We passed the preventative control. As we operate on this account, the bank can look at anomalies in the operation. So let's say the normal A12346 user will put their account, foreign currency balance, check for deposits, look at the paycheck that they got, credit card, maybe pay off their credit card or part of it. But that will be the normal actions that they will take on the day-to-day. Maybe once a month they transfer large amount of money elsewhere. Now, if someone comes in and they pass the access control on the preventive side, and now they start raising flags because they act on that bank account and creates anomalies, that access can be paused, can be put on suspension. You see what I'm saying? It's like the bank will say, okay, there are too many anomalies in your actions. We're gonna pause your access. What they did is that they detected the anomalies, and then they tried to correct the falsified access that I gained. Does that make sense, Shachar?
Yep. And
right,
for example, corrective response for this action?
And the corrective response, the corrective for violated access control is to suspend the account. This account is now suspended until administrator releases it. We can actually do that on Microsoft networks. We can say, if you entered more than 3 times the wrong password, your account is suspended until administrator will release it for you.
Okay.
All right. So that's the correct. All right. Now we move to the multi-factor authentication, and I'm sure you're all remembering that Jungle Book snake that is trying to hypnotize us all. And I would like to take a look at this again and say, okay, I know this, I understand this, and yeah, this is a big part of Domain 5 and identity and access management type of questions. The multi-factor authentication, it's big today, and there are certain problems with it, and we will touch on some of them after this slide. But the basic is this: something you know, type 1, something you have, type 2, something you are, type 3. And in something you are, we can have the biometric with type 1 errors, which is FRR, false rejection rate, and type 2 false acceptance rate. Okay, so the logic here is that any one of these can act as a single factor authentication. We can authenticate using any one of these, but in order to strengthen the process of authentication, we want to use more than one. If we use 2, then it's 2FA, two-factor authentication. We want to use multi-factor authentication. That means a combination of probably these 3, or adding some more authentication methods from the outside. For example, geolocation, so somewhere you are, which is not a type in this multi-factor authentication. Real good?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So as we look at biometrics, in the identification of the biometrics in those systems, we have that one-to-many, what we call one-to-many search of an individual characters. So this is searching through the database of what identifies that individual. That's for the identification part. And then for the authentication, we have one-to-one. So as we search the identity of many identities, we detect that one. And for this one, we build the access, or the authenticated access, based on the need to know and list privileges, as in any other access. This is not different. The difference between biometric access and any other access mechanism that is logical is that in biometric, we have few problems with it, few challenges. Most of biometric access control can potentially, pay attention to what I say, can potentially, not necessarily will, but can potentially violate some serious privacy regulations. So I expect a lot of questions around that. Privacy is big today. GDPR made it even bigger. The past couple of years, we did a lot in privacy. So I expect biometric questions, privacy issue, very big. The other issue is the user acceptance, okay? The way users can accept the fact that we now use biometric system for access. Their tolerance, their appetite for, basically its tolerance of the user with the system is very short. They have very limited attention to that process of authentication using biometric, and we need to be aware of that as we implement that. So when we talk about privacy, and the eye scan biometric systems, there are 2 areas: the iris on the front and the retina on the back. Retina violates a lot more privacy areas, and as you do the retina, you're at risk of violating a lot of privacy regulations. However, it's much more accurate, right? The best biometric mechanism is the DNA sampling. We can get DNA, and this will give us close to 100% definition of that identity. So we can be certain that this one is the right identity. However, DNA is a super violation of privacy and cause a lot of trouble. So that is the balance. So as we use the eye scan, the retina on the back can potentially violate a lot of privacy. That's why we choose to use the iris scan on the front. Less accurate, but puts us in a much better position in terms of privacy. And then the user acceptance that we mentioned before, users' attention for the enrollment process can potentially get up to 2 minutes. So anything above that is not acceptable by the users, and their average speed of or the attention that it can give to the process of authentication is 6 to 10 seconds. Okay, so you need to remember these numbers for your CISSP exam because there might be some questions on the user acceptance limitation. The limitations of access control technology can be found with the FRR and FAR. So as mentioned before, FRR, false rejection rate, is the type 1 error. The false acceptance, okay, R comes before the A in this one. The false acceptance is the type 2 error. And the cross between them is the rank that we give for the accuracy of the biometric system. This is something we need to ask for from the vendor of that system. Okay, so again, going back to your CISSP exam, they will ask you about type 1 error, FRR, R comes before the A. Type 2 error, FAR, false acceptance. People that are not supposed to enter the perimeter are actually entering the perimeter. Thank you. So that's false acceptance, and that's the worst one. Okay, we can live, we can survive with false rejection. We can survive with the fact that the CEO is getting pissed at the security card in the entrance of the building. We can live with this. But what we cannot live with is the fact that someone that is not supposed to be authenticated is now walking around the organization. This is bad. Okay, so type 2 error is worse than type 1. The cross between them is the rank of that technology that we are about to use. Again, summarizing this last time that we were going to talk about this, the biometric access system: reliability, user-friendliness, cost, and enrollment time. This is important. The enrollment time is important for you. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I think we pretty much touched this before, so that why it was relatively easy. Next one is SSO. SSO stands for single sign-on. Let me ask you a question. What is the main challenge that we have? Challenge, not a problem, challenge that we have with SSO technology.
If it's compromised, basically, your entire identity is compromised.
So if it's compromised, then
you can access many systems.
Right. So if we call it by name, that's what we call a single point of failure. Okay. So we have that system, and if it fails, then everything else fails after. Okay. So we cannot control everything that happens after. That's why we need to consider this, heavily. The security concerns here are big. I mean, we don't want to just authorize this across the organization. We need to consider how we do it and how secure is this technology for us. So for the single sign-on, the other single sign-on that we have is the Kerberos. The Kerberos is a protocol used long before Active Directory. Microsoft adopted this protocol to use on its Kerberos before the end of 1990s, and they use that until this day on their Active Directory to encrypt that part of the single sign-on mechanism that they created called Active Directory. From that and onward, a lot of other organizations started using, and with internet everywhere, we started using federated single sign-on. So I log into Facebook and now I can use my identity elsewhere simply because it's trusted, simply because we trust those other mechanisms. We trust Facebook, we trust Google, we trust the identity managed there, and we want to utilize that in different websites. For the part that we are looking at, for the federated united identity information or identity management, we use the SAML, the security assertion markup language, and this one is used to leverage existing identity for authentication to service providers. And again, it's not the only technology that is out there. There are many other technologies, for example, the Sesame and the Kryptonite, and OAuth and OpenID, okay? OpenID can be used to authenticate with more than one vendor, big vendors. For example, Google, okay? We can use our identity in Google to authenticate with others. OAuth today is more recommended and is used, again, by organizations, large organizations such as Google, but also OpenID. OpenID has some issues with it, okay? Since OpenID is so trusted and it acts in certain hierarchy and in trust relationship, then it's very open to phishing attacks, it's prone to other attacks using the web infrastructure. So, for example, someone can potentially hack a server that uses OpenID and implement a script there that will eventually bring those users to be victims of CSRF, cross-site request forgery. We will look at those tomorrow as we speak about the OS top 10, either tomorrow or Friday. But think of the OpenID as very similar or reminds the way the CA works, as in hierarchy. There's a trust between them, and there are lists everywhere of those identities. And if we do not protect them, then one compromises in any area of the OpenID, then it can compromise the whole system. And Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and all these big names are very concerned about that exactly, and they keep developing those protocols or those methods to work in a federated SSO simply because it's easy for the user. Okay, the ease of use is today important. The bad things can happen because we designed this ease of use and didn't consider everything that should have been considered while designing this. So big companies, they bring a lot of technology, they bring a lot of advancement, but we need to consider whether we are to trust them, yes or no. I don't think Deutsche Bank is going to trust Google Identity Management to log into the Deutsche Bank accounts. I don't think it'll ever happen with banks. But that's just my opinion on banks. Identity as a service is something that we see in past few years as Microsoft builds its account management known as Windows Live ID. And for this one, we have what we call IDAS, and this one is, again, SSO is managed on Microsoft, so we can get Microsoft services on Azure. We can get directory services based on the identity managed as a service in Microsoft. The two-factor authentication, the multi-factor authentication can be easily implemented there as well to protect the identification, authentication, authorization, and auditing process, just like any other process, but everything is done. Any questions on this so far?
No.
Are you all familiar with this, online identity management? I'm sure you are. You're probably using Office 365 and the Windows IDs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not news to you, right?
It's not news, yeah. I mean, you can have a lot of debate about the security of the protocols, but what exactly they're asking in the test about those protocols?
Again, this can be a part of the test that they will ask, what is the use of an OpenID? What are the differences between OAuth 1 and OAuth 2? Okay, so OAuth 2 is now the recommended one, is used by Google. OpenID is also used by Google. What are the characters for Sesame? Sesame is used by European systems for multi-vendor environment. Okay, so basically this part is mostly memorizing the small details here behind the definition. So that I would expect this type of questions in your CISSP.
Okay.
All right. Kerberos. We talked about the fact that Kerberos protects the is used cryptography, symmetric cryptography on the Microsoft authentication process, the Active Directory of Microsoft. This is very popular today, but it encompasses its own vulnerabilities. So the fact that we have that key distribution center for the Kerberos, for the SSO.
But a lot of terminology.
Come again?
Yeah.
What was that? Oh, Carlos, sorry, you were not on mute. So the KDC, the Key Distribution Center, is great to do SSO in Microsoft platform or infrastructures. However, it does become a single point of failure for the SSO mechanism. Carlo, do you want to say something? Because I see that you're going online.
No, everything is okay. Sorry if
okay.
I interrupted you somehow.
All right, good. So those Kerberos vulnerabilities, you know, as much as we want to work with the Kerberos, we need to understand that there might be some abuse of the Kerberos system and the way it works. And, you know, the tickets issued for any identity managed in that Active Directory by the KDC can be compromised. So someone can not only hack the domain admin account, but they can hack the KDC itself. And if they do, they actually control our domain in general, the Active Directory in general, and even the ticket issued for the domain admin himself or herself. Okay, so this is much larger than just managing your identities in your organization. The KDC should be protected. And if that one is hacked, you probably don't know about it. This is what we call golden ticket. This is the area of hackers. If they penetrate that, they will stay there and they will probably manage your identities, let you work, but work with your identities to gain whatever they want. So they want your KDC up and running. If they don't want the organization to crash, but if they hack that one, probably through phishing, probably through some unsecured or untrusted links that someone clicked here and there, probably with domain admin and permissions, and that allowed them to control now your KDC. They put a footstep there, a foothold there, and that's how they get to all the tickets, including your domain admin. So if you think that you're a domain admin, you control the Active Directory, that's not true. Look for the loopholes. Look for those vulnerabilities in your Kerberos system. And if you don't know how to do that, you know, ask for help. Ask for a consultant who's come in and check your directory for that golden ticket. So as we manage those identity, we go through three main phases: provisioning the account, periodic reviews, and then revocation of the accounts. The provisioning of the accounts is the initial step, provisioning anyone, the identity, and that identity is connected to that database behind it. And if we work SSO, then that's fine. We need to just be able to protect that technology. And if we don't, let's use multi-factor authentication and whatnot, other than just allow those identities to roam out there. The reviews are done mainly to detect those permission creeps, as we call them. Okay, someone moving from one role to another, and they drag or they have their old permissions with them, and now they can both the old role and the new one as well. So that's why we need to do the periodic reviews. You know, once every 3 months, once a quarter, once every 2 months, once every 6 months. You know, you decide on the period of time that you want to invest in this, but this is highly important for you to protect on all identities. And then as users are terminated from the organization, you know, the exit interview and all that, the NDA that we saw before, this is the time to revoke their access. You know, you don't want to harm their access unless they are terminated, right? You don't want to do that before they're terminated. So this is very delicate. You have to work with HR, but termination is essentially very important for your security, for the security organization. So I can expect questions in your CISSP on either one of these three phases. As you provision the accounts and you work SSO, what will be the mechanism to protect those accounts? As you do your periodic reviews, what do you look for in the KDC environment, in that Kerberos environment? You look for the golden ticket. You look for someone that hacked your KDC process tickets. How quickly do you recommend an organization to revoke access? As quickly as termination takes place. Okay, so these are the questions that I can expect around this three. Are we all clear here?
Yep.
Notice how the day goes by and you guys just shut down your videos. I don't know if you shut down completely, but you do shut down your videos. Valentino from time to time will come up and I will see him like that. It's like, you know, it's like, leave me alone, I'm half dead, and then turn off the video. Shachar, I see your finger. Here you are, beautiful faces. People, I miss you all. Jack, I didn't see you at all today, man. I didn't see you at all.
Yeah.
I think
I have a very low light here in my apartment. That's why. Okay, wait. Wait, I'm coming in.
I'm joking. Last time I saw Aaron, I think was 2 days ago. Anyway, no pressure, no pressure. Don't worry about it.
Not nice, man, not nice.
No, you can
but I will send you a photo.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We're all good. All right. So we're almost there, guys. We're almost done with domain 5. This is, you know, an important domain. It can exist in any question. However, look at the minimalization of requirements that we have for this domain. Very focused, okay? Very focused on, you know, what can go wrong with those identities. So, so let's look at the access control modules. This is chapter 14. Access control modules can be any one of these three, and in relation to the Bella Padula and Biba and Clark-Wilson one that we covered yesterday. So the access control modules that we're looking at are again aimed to two different types of organization. Can you guess what these two are?
Financial or economic and government.
Commercial and government.
Commercial government.
Exactly. Commercial and government / military. Exactly this. This is a pattern in the CISSP, okay? So the DAC, DAC, discretionary access control, is your commercial. So please write down on your presentation, please write down commercial on the DAC. The MAC on the other side, right? The MAC, the fourth one, is your governmental or military access control. So what DAC says is that basically it's discretionary. It's up to an admin to decide on permissions and on need to know. There's always a king up there, okay? So that's the DAC. Owners can modify permissions. Owners can own the data. On Mac, the government owns the data, not the user. We don't have a king. We don't have an admin. We have clearance. And we have data classifications, all right? That's the main differences between the two. And the midsection, RBAC, role-based access control and rule-based access control, can exist in both. So draw a circle between DAC, RBAC, and RBAC, and then another circle between MAC, RBAC, and RBAC. So MAC can include rule-based access control and role-based access control, but also DAC. But DAC and MAC cannot coexist. Make sense?
No.
No?
No.
No? All right.
You're too fast here.
Am I too fast? Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe it's the time, but I'm old or something. Right?
I
want the repetition,
coffee,
please.
That's my cup of coffee, man. I had a cup of coffee. You should do that after lunch.
True.
So again, DAC is your commercial access control module. MAC is your governmental access control module. RBACs, role-based and rule-based access control, can exist in both, but DAC and MAC cannot coexist in the same organization. Okay, if I decided on my organization that I have an admin access, an admin and owners of the data that can decide on their own data, I cannot have them working in MAC. Clearance and classification and all this. Maybe the data can be classified, but the admins control everything. This is discretionary. It's based on the user, on the owner's decision. Okay? Any owner can decide on their own data whatever they want, and I need to accept it. All right?
So what is MAC?
MAC is governmental. That means that subjects will work according to their clearance, and data will be based on classification of data.
Okay, so it's the difference is that again, DAC is every access or as an owner or every yeah. So I can be the owner and I decide who has access to this data. And MAC requires a clearance, like it means like it has a baseline or a set of regulations that everybody has to work accordingly.
Right, exactly this. And the data belongs to the organization, not to the owner. Okay? Even if I create a file now, the file belongs to the organization. All right? Well, good?
In DAC or in MAC?
In MAC.
Oh, MAC, okay.
Mandatory access control, the data belongs to the organization.
Okay.
All right? Well, good?
Yep.
All right, cool. So let's look at types of threats that we have with access control. Access aggregation is the same thing as permission creep that we mentioned before. People that move from one role to another and they aggregate their access to systems. For this one, we want to implement need to know, list privileges, separation of duties, periodic reviews, right? Those are the controls that we can implement against that. When we encounter brute force attack against the website, we can block that access, right? Account lockout. And the same thing for dictionary attack, which uses known passwords from the internet. And again, pounding our websites or pounding our system. So as we detect that, we can run the account lockout. Sniffer or sniffing and spoofing, it's basically the same thing. Someone is trying to penetrate that channel between two parties and then intercept some of the information that is being transferred there. So for this one, we have pretty straightforward security methods called encryption. So we use encryption of data in transit. We can also use data at rest for those machines, right? But for the spoofing and sniffing, which takes place on the channel of communication, we implement the data in transit encryption. Social engineering, phishing attacks, and vishing are all the control that we have for all is basically on the user side. So user awareness for how to use emails, how to detect malicious emails, what to click and what not to click, and this is done periodically. Okay, so we need to repeat that message. There's no end date for user awareness. Okay, the users can become your strongest link. Few other problems that we might have with access are password attacks. Okay, someone can guess the password. I don't know if you've seen I shared a post on LinkedIn. Very funny, hilarious comedian called Michael McIntyre, a British comedian, and I shared the post. I think a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago. I shared that post on LinkedIn and went to sleep. And a couple of days later, I realized that this post got over 400,000 reactions online. This is crazy. And the guy simply talks about the way we structure passwords. And it's very funny to think on how we all structure the same way. First, we chose a password, just the name of someone. Then we added the numbers, then the special characters. and then you're asked to have one capital letter, and all this kind of evolved on us. But again, it's not too hard to get the common people's passwords today, because people tend to look at passwords as a difficulty, as an obstacle on their path to their data or information, and not as a security measure, not necessarily as a security measure. And that's a problem for us security people. So password guessing can be a problem for us, but also password cracking. And we can use tools to do that, or we can use brute force and dictionary attacks, as we've seen before. We can use tokens to make life harder for the attacker to break that access point of that user. So tokens are used for one time or a few times. You basically want your token to be dynamic and to be one time. However, there are tokens that are static, that are the same, and those are the most common example are the ATMs. Okay, you have your credit card, you have the debit card or bank card. You go to the ATM, it's the same PIN code all the time. If it gets compromised, if the card gets compromised, you go to the bank and you change that one. So this is less protected, but then you can have the synchronous and asynchronous dynamic password. So synchronous, we already know it works with an external clock, with an external timer. Okay, so for this one, the example is as you get the code on your text message, you have 60 seconds or 3 minutes to enter that code. The 3 minutes are counted by world clock. So the asynchronous, which is the other part, the asynchronous has its own clock. And this clock is not in sync with the world clock, has its own clock. And the best example is this one, the RSA token, which has its own clock and then changes that PIN code that you have, or token that you have. It's one-time token, but it changes based on its own clock, and you can control that from the server, from that token issuing server. The last one is the challenge response. And if you remember, we talked about challenge response, and we mentioned the fact challenge response is basically the basic example of challenge response is the password. But there can be other challenge responses as well. We can be presented with a picture and say, choose the picture, click the pictures that has bicycles in them, or click the pictures that include parts of buses. This one here, the challenge response here, is for us to look at the letters and numbers and enter them. These are not ASCII-based letters and characters. These are just pictures. For the computer, it doesn't detect them as ASCII code, hence it is less hackable for hackers at that period of time. Okay, so the token, the strength of the token is the fact that it's a very limited in time token. It's one time, you cannot use it again, and it's dynamic, it changes. Okay, that's the strong token that you want to have in the path of authorizing access to your subjects, to your users. Any questions on this topic, guys?
No.
Right. We covered a lot today. We cover a lot every day. This is Bootcamp. Carlo, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I do have a question regarding the tokens, these which are asymmetric. How do they change from the server if they're working offline? That's
a good question. The technology works that as I issue you the token, I program that token. And until the next time I meet that token, it operates on that programming. So it doesn't communicate with the server. It doesn't need to communicate with the server just one time.
Okay.
All right. All right, guys, listen, we covered a lot today. We even had time for some practice, and that's what I want you guys to do, okay? So between now and tomorrow, again, 5 exams of each of you. Yes, Valentino, I know. I hear your pain, but I need the scores to advance, okay? So look at domain 3, domain 4, and domain 5. I want you to focus on domain 4 and 5.
Okay.
Okay, domains 4 and 5, but also give me one for domain 3. All right. So between now and tomorrow morning, 5 exams from each of you. All right, guys.
Okay.
Aye.
Okay. Okay.
Aye, sir. All right. I will see you tomorrow
I
morning.
promise to try.
I will see you tomorrow morning, guys.
Okay.
See you.
Have a
All
nice
right.
evening.
Ciao.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.